Welcome, Andrew. Andrew Mason is a senior product developer at Podia and content creator based in Phoenix, Arizona. Andrew is very active in the Ruby podcasting scene and currently co-hosts Remote Ruby and Ruby for All. He's also the co-creator and editor of the Ruby Radar newsletter when he is not mentoring juniors or working on open source projects. Andrew enjoys hiking and live sporting events. Talk to him about building Rails applications with components, mentoring juniors, podcasting, and ADHD. Andrew, take it away.
All right, everybody. Welcome to BridgetownConf 2022. I want to thank y'all for attending from wherever you are in the world, and special thanks to Jared for inviting me. My name is Andrew Mason. If you don't already know me, you can find me around the web at Andrew M Codes on Twitter, GitHub, Reddit, etc. Or you can find me on my website, andrewm.codes, which is, of course, a Bridgetown site. I am a senior product developer at Podia. Podia is an all-in-one platform for creatives to create, sell, and market digital online goods like courses, webinars, communities, and more. It would actually be a perfect place to create a Bridgetown course. So if anyone takes some inspiration from this conference, I highly encourage you to check us out at podia.com. Like Jared said, I also create a lot of content in the Ruby community. You can find me podcasting on Remote Ruby and Ruby for All each week, as well as publishing the Ruby Radar newsletter every Sunday. If you're looking for free Ruby content, I highly encourage you to check out what I am creating. So now the title of my talk is Learn Enough Bridgetown to be Dangerous. But before we get into the framework, I want to take a step back. And I will say I have incredible ADHD and I tend to talk quite fast. So apologies for that. We may end a little sooner, but hopefully y'all can bear with me. So towards the end of 2016, my life was taking a dramatic turn. I was a junior at a university studying computer science, and I had realized that nothing I was learning was going to help me get a job in the real world. I knew I was good at programming, so I began searching for popular jobs for programmers at the time, which eventually led me to web development. I had been interested in the web for as long as I could remember and had fond memories of making WordPress sites in middle school and high school. I'd also learned the basics of HTML and CSS, and the more I researched, the better of an idea it became, since I learned I could largely teach myself everything I needed to know. So less than a year later in 2017, I had taught myself the basics of web development. I learned Bootstrap, I took a graphic design course, and I started trying to find clients to build websites for. The first website I was ever paid for was published in the summer of 2017, a single static page designed with Bootstrap and FTP'd onto a server. And you can't tell from this, this way back archive, but it was styled at the time. But building and designing the website was kind of difficult for my first time. Since I was teaching myself, I hadn't learned that I didn't need to copy my head element, my nav bar, and my styles every single time I made a new page. There was actually a better way. Enter static site generators. According to Cloudflare, a static site generator, or SSG as I might refer to it, is a tool that generates a full static HTML website based on raw data and a set of templates. Essentially, a static site generator automates the task of coding individual HTML pages and gets those pages ready to serve to users ahead of time. In 2008, Jekyll was released for the first time. Inspired by Nanoc, which is still active around today, Jekyll is widely considered to be the first modern static site generator to ever be released. The templates were written in Liquid and Markdown, which allowed developers to build their static sites even faster. GitHub Pages was released later that year to make hosting Jekyll sites very, very easy. Jamstack, which refers to JavaScript API markup, was introduced in 2015 and quickly caught fire in the web development community. Services like Netlify and Vercel became very popular as a way to easily use Git-centered workflows with modern build tools and static site generators to build static sites quickly and easily and get them live for all your users. In 2015, the static site generator boom would begin with Gatsby. It would be released and become a massive player in the space. Next.js was released in 2016, and tools like 11t and Asher would follow. These tools integrated with the latest build systems and allowed you to build static sites with tools like React, GraphQL, Vue, and more. Not on this page is Nuxt and Hugo, which are also two very big players in the static site game. So in 2019, I picked up Gatsby since that's what everyone was using at the time. I would return to my very first website and rebuild it using Gatsby. I was happy with it for the moment since it allowed me to easily build sites with Tailwind CSS, which I had picked up in college and I was very religious about. But then 2020 rolls around and the pandemic hits. I started building more static sites for fun with Gatsby as a way to pass the time, but I was beginning to get kind of frustrated. During the day, I was a Rails engineer. I was working with ERB, backends, MySQL, CRUD operations, REST. But during the evenings, I was wrestling with JavaScript dependencies, remembering how GraphQL worked, learning TypeScript, and just spending way too much time debugging instead of actually building. And then Bridgetown was born. And as I was getting more frustrated with Gatsby, Jared was also getting frustrated building sites. He saw that Jekyll gave him almost everything he needed, but he wanted more. And after some discussion with the Jekyll team, he forked the Jekyll repo and began reimagining how we could build static sites with Ruby. And that's when I discovered Bridgetown. After taking a look at the framework, I asked Jared to come on Remote Ruby and talk about his goals for the project, and I was hooked. After this podcast, I would fall in love with Bridgetown, and that love is something I want to share with all of you. So what is Bridgetown before we jump into how to make a site? Bridgetown is a next generation progressive site generator and full stack framework powered by Ruby. I'm going to use a few of these terms in the next slide, so I just want to cover what they mean. SSR is known as server-side rendering, is where your HTML is not pre-built as static files, but where your HTML is rendered in real time before delivering it to the browser. CSR is known as client-side rendering. This is where your JavaScript libraries manipulate the DOM of the web page based on user interactivity and API calls to backend or third-party services. And partial hydration is essentially a hybrid of both of these two approaches. You start with some combination of SSG and SSR, and then hydrate certain parts and certain components on the front end to handle interactivity if and when you need it. So the next generation part of what Bridgetown is, Bridgetown represents an evolution of thinking from previous generations of tools in this space, especially with the Ruby ecosystem. At heart, Bridgetown is essentially a modern rewrite of Jekyll. It started off as a fork in April 2020, but has been completely reworked and reimagined while adding a ton of new and unique features. I wanted to run a diff between the Jekyll and the Bridgetown codebase and didn't have enough time, but I would imagine it's very, very low at this point in the amount of files that have remained, if any. It's also a progressive site generator. And in a progressive generation workflow, we're aiming to assemble the most basic form of HTML at the web server level, aka static files. This is exactly the type of output you get with most static site generators like Jekyll, and is the default mode of Bridgetown. Also, the other mode of Bridgetown we're coming into is this more interactive era with SSR and CSR and partial hydration, which we talked about a second ago. And those are now coming into Bridgetown and being able to be used, and it's really pushing the whole framework forward. And Bridgetown is also a full stack framework. Now, this part of the framework is definitely still evolving. I think Jared's going to talk more about it at the end of the conference, but I am very, very excited to see where we kind of end up and how we can leverage Bridgetown to interact with things like MySQL and databases and use Active Record, and how we can integrate them more with our Rails apps. The most important part of Bridgetown is that it's powered by Ruby, making it really the perfect tool for Rubyists like me. So in 2020, when I was getting really frustrated building blogs with JavaScript, Ruby was a breath of fresh air. And suddenly I could use these modern tools that I wanted to. I could use Tailwind, and I could still use Ruby, and Ruby makes me happy. So all of a sudden, building sites became fun again. So instead of just talking about the framework, what it is and what it does, let's build something together real quickly, just to get a quick overview of the framework. Now, we're not going to cover everything. We're just going to get a quick flyby so that you could leave this conference and build your own site right out of the gate. First step, and the first thing we need to do is install the Bridgetown gem. This will give us access to the Bridgetown CLI, which we will use to build our site. We also need Ruby and Node on our machines in order to do this, unless you're using like a Docker container or GitHub Codespaces or anything of the like. Before we build our first site, though, we need to decide what template engine we want to use. Bridgetown comes with 3 out of the box, and these are the templates we will write to compose our resources and our layouts, and we'll write our components in it. And we have available Liquid, ERB, and Serbia right out of the gate. So Liquid is the default option. It's also the default option of tools like Jekyll and Eleventy. And it looks something like this, developed by Shopify for Shopify stores. ERB is what I personally recommend you build your Bridgetown sites with because it's very familiar to Rails developers. And as far as I know, Bridgetown is one of the first static site generators to allow us to use ERB. Serbia is another option. It's a template language written by Jared for Bridgetown, specifically to bridge the gap between ERB and Liquid. And you can also build your site with Haml and Slim. Now that we've chosen our template engine, it's time to create our blog. We can use the Bridgetown new command and pass the -t flag with ERB to specify that we want our templates ERB. The site generator will run, it'll install gems, add the default site templates, and run yarn. And then we can CD into our new blog and see what Bridgetown has built for us. The first thing we want to do is start the Bridgetown server using bin Bridgetown start. This will start the site on localhost 4000, and then we can open the browser and see what we have. There we go. There's our beautiful new Bridgetown site. The majority of your text-based content and view templates in Bridgetown are processed as resources. There are two types of resources, standard and special data resources. The resource you are looking at when you start the Bridgetown server is the index resource, which belongs to the default pages collection. All resources are stored inside of the source folder inside of your site. If we want to edit the index page, we can open the source folder, find the index resource, and then update the content like so. And then when we go back to the browser, it has automatically refreshed with our new content. Very cool, very fast. Oops, go back, go back. There you go. Front matter is a snippet of YAML or Ruby data, which sits at the top of a file between special line delimiters. You can think of front matter as a data store consisting of one or more key value pairs. We can use this data store to access variables inside of our template. All you have to do is add variables to the front matter and access it using data in your templates. So here I'm adding a variable foo and it equals bar. And then inside of the resource, I can do data.foo and refresh the page. And we see our bar has showed up. In Bridgetown, we group resource-based content by collections. Every resource belongs to a collection, and out of the box, Bridgetown gives you the default pages collection. So every resource, unless it belongs to another collection, will belong to the pages collection. Post collections for building our blog, and the special data collection where you can store data files written in JSON, CSV, YAML, or even Ruby. Let's take a look at where our posts are stored. All collections are prefixed with an underscore except for pages, which can be in the root of the source folder or under a pages directory. Once resources in our collection, we can iterate through them to create an index page for those resources. So here we're iterating through the post collections resources, and then we're showing a link when the link is the title of the resource or of the post. Changing the content of a resource does not affect all of the resources in that collection, though. If we want to change the layout of all resources in a collection, we can change the layout that they are assigned to. To show you how we can change content using layouts, let's make a new blog post, and then we will update the template to place hello world at the bottom of every post. So here I'm duplicating the post, and then I'm updating our title, replacing the content. And then when I go back to our post index, we can see my new post. So now if I go into the post layout, I can add hello world. And now if we go back to the browser, we can see that hello world is at the bottom of this blog post. And if we go back to the very first blog post, we can see hello world there as well. So templates are layouts are a very similar way to they work in Rails, in that they wrap certain resources, and you can define in the front matter what a resource will use as its layout. Pagination is also built directly into Bridgetown, which is a huge time saver, and especially if you're building a blog. So let's add pagination to our post so we can get an idea of how it works. I've added several more posts to show you how we can add pagination. And I didn't change all the titles because I'm lazy. But the first thing we need to do is go into the Bridgetown configuration and set pagination enabled true. Anytime you change the configuration for Bridgetown, you need to restart the server. So we will go into our post page and add the paginate keyword to our front matter and tell it that the collection we want to paginate is posts. And we're going to tell it we want to paginate 4 posts per page. And then we replace our collections.posts with paginator. When we refresh the page, we can go back and we can only see 4 pages or 4 posts. So if we add a next link, we can now go to the next page. And you can do the same thing with the previous link. So that is how you can add pagination in less than a minute to any collection on your site. It's very awesome and a huge time saver. Bridgetown also comes with 2 built-in taxonomies, categories and tags, and you can also add your own. We can add categories and tags to our front matter and then access them the same way we access the other front matter variables with the data variable. You can then create pages to list all posts by tag using prototype pages, which I'm not going to get into now. It's on the Bridgetown documentation, covers all of it. Bridgetown also has components built in out of the box, which is, I think, kind of what we expect from a static site generator in 2022. Bridgetown comes with a navbar component out of the box. If we want to change it, we can go to our components directory, and then we can see that we're rendering this component from the default layout. We go into the component, and then we can remove the image from the top, refresh the page, and now the image is gone. Bridgetown also lets you store static data using the special data collection located in your source folder. Your site comes with a default metadata file, but we can also add custom ones written in Ruby, JSON, YAML, and CSV. Here I am updating the title for the metadata for the whole site. And now I'm going to add a new data file, and I'm going to use Ruby. And it's just a hash. So once we create the new data file, we want to display it. So we can go in here and we see in our default layout, we're rendering a footer. So I'm going to come in here to the footer partial, which is another way you can display data. And I'm going to say, follow me on Twitter. And then I'm going to add a link, except I'm going to do it backwards because I messed it up the first time. And I'm going to do site.data.links.twitter. And if you remember, my data file is named links, and the key for the Twitter link is Twitter. So now I have follow me on Twitter link, and I can do that for really any sort of data that I want to use. There are a lot of things we want to do every time we build a new Bridgetown site, and Bridgetown has introduced bundled configurations to help with that. So here's a list of the current configurations that you can use out of the box. We have Turbo, Stimulus, Lit, Shoelace, Open Props, Ruby2.js, PostCSS, Tailwind, a render config, Netlify config, Versal config, GitHub Pages config, and you can add testing with Minitest or Cypress. So these are things that the community or Jared has contributed to the library, and they make building your site really, really quickly. So we can use this bundle configuration command to add a bundle configuration to our site. In this example, we're going to add Turbo. So just run bin Bridgetown configure Turbo, restart the site. And then I can see that it created these files automatically for me. So I'm going to go into the index.js, and I'm going to uncomment this line that the configuration added for me. And now I can see that Turbo is running, and it is doing these really cool transitions right out of the box. And so that saved me a ton of time because that only took me a few seconds to add. Bridgetown also has a plugin and automation ecosystem, which, as Jared said, is growing and is going to be the focus for the near future. Some plugins are managed by the Bridgetown core team. Others are built by the community. I built several when I first discovered Bridgetown, some of which have been rewritten to be even better, which I absolutely love. You can see a big list of plugins by going to the Bridgetown plugin topic on GitHub. That's where I like to see them. I think they're also on the Bridgetown site. So let's use an automation to add Tailwind to our site. Like I said in the beginning, I love Tailwind. I use it on every site. I'm sorry, Jared, I love it. So we're going to use the Bridgetown apply command, which will use Thor under the hood to run commands and insert files onto our site. We can then remove the default styles from our page, update a template to see Tailwind in effect. So I'm going to use the CLI here. It's going to start running commands, and then I can restart the site. You can see it created all these files. So if I go into the index.css and remove the default styles that Bridgetown comes with, I can go into my about page and then realize, oh no, I actually need to update the layout here. So go to the page layout, and then I'm going to add a class, a Tailwind class to this header, text4xl, go back to the page, go to about, there it is. Very cool. It took a few seconds. Bridgetown's front-end build system was originally Webpack, but as Rails has decided to move to ES-Build, so has Bridgetown. And I will say the new ES-Build configuration is so much faster. In the very beginning, I was really interested in improving the front-end build system. And so I was investigating tools like Snowpack and Webpack 5 and all these things. And I'm very, very happy that ES-Build ended up coming out on top. And I'm very happy, especially because learning and using ES-Build in Bridgetown can help you in your Rails app if you're switching to ES-Build. So you get a default ES-Build configuration out of the box that you probably don't want to change. And then on top of that, you get this ES-Build config.js in the root of your project, which you are encouraged to change. And this is where you can start customizing, adding in plugins, changing settings, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just a lot faster and a lot nicer to use out of the box. So let's get into a little more advanced Ruby. So like I said, Bridgetown is for Rubyists. You can do so much with Ruby. You can write your templates in Ruby, in pure Ruby. You can write your data files in Ruby. You can, write plugins in Ruby. You can write Ruby. And that's, I think, what I love most about Bridgetown. So I'm going to show you an inspector, which was added in Bridgetown 1.1. I think these are super, super cool. It provides a useful way to review or manipulate the output of your HTML or XML resources. The API utilizes Nokogiri, a Ruby gem, which many of us are probably familiar with, but maybe never used directly. And it allows us to work with a DOM-like API directly on the nodes of a document tree. So what does that look like in practice? So I'm going to go into the plugins folder of my Bridgetown site under builders and add inspectors.rb. And inside of it, we're going to use the syntax that is documented on the Bridgetown site. And what we're going to do is look through our document and find every single link tag. And if there is a target on the link, we are going to skip and go to the next one. And if our target is pointing, if we don't have a target, but our URL is pointing to an external site, so not inside of our site, not a relative resource, but something external like Twitter, GitHub, etc., we want to add the target _blank to it. And so this is a really, really great and easy way to say, hey, I don't want to go through every single link on my site and add _blank and no refer, no opener, whatever. You can do it straight from here at the end of your process. You could do this to add in links to your markdown headers. You can do this to address and flag images without alt text. You can do so much with this new API. I think it's super, super cool. You can also write a generator when you need Bridgetown to add data to existing content or to programmatically create new pages, posts, and the like. I'm not going to show an example of that, but you can look on the Bridgetown documentation to see examples of that. You can use web components. You can use view component, which is what I love to do. In addition to the Bridgetown components that are built in, you can leverage it with view component. And if you're a Rails developer, I highly recommend trying this out because I have gotten a lot better at writing view components at work by learning how to do it better in my Bridgetown sites. So I will almost use Bridgetown sites as a way to test component theories and the way I think about building components. There's also things like I18N built in. There are so many things built into Bridgetown now, and I'm not going to go through all of them because this is a shallow dive, but just know that there's so many things, and the Bridgetown website will tell you everything you need to know. So now that we've built our basic blog, what's kind of the last step? Well, that would be deploying. So we can use the bin Bridgetown deploy command, and that will build our site for production. And then you can use a bundled configuration like we talked about earlier to automatically set up a Vercel, a Netlify, GitHub Pages, or render configuration file for you to make deploying very, very simple. And so I tested how quickly could I get a blog on the internet with Bridgetown by like literally starting with the Bridgetown new command and ending with a site live on the internet. And it took me exactly 1 minute, I think 61 seconds, I think, to be exact, to go from Bridgetown new to a domain with my site on it live using Vercel. So you can build these sites very, very quickly. The bundle configurations with the configurations for deploys are very, very helpful. Definitely check those out. So as we kind of round into the final part of this talk, I want to say, why Bridgetown? Why should I build Bridgetown? Why should I go tell my company that we should remake our blog in Bridgetown? Well, if you're a Ruby developer, productivity. And on top of just being able to use Ruby and not having to context switch, no GraphQL, unless you want to use GraphQL, because you totally can, but it's not a requirement like it is with some of the other frameworks. You can stay within the context that you know, you love, and you understand and feel productive. And I think the worst thing about building static sites is that you kind of wind up in configuration hell, but not with Bridgetown. You can build sites super fast, super quick, and you can stay in the context that you know and that you work in. The next thing is Ruby. I mean, I love Ruby. I love building my sites with Rails. I work as a Rails engineer. I love it. I want to do it for as long as I possibly can. And that's why we need more tools like Bridgetown in the Ruby ecosystem. We need people to be excited about using Ruby, to be, to have this feeling that, oh my God, like I can use Ruby for this. I don't have to use these other tools. Like I can use the thing that I love and I don't have to make compromises. And so for newer developers or for, senior developers, like Bridgetown is a great way to really flex your Ruby knowledge, to get better at writing basic Ruby instead of like relying on some of the Rails things that we've known and love. I started out as a Rails developer, and I think Bridgetown has really helped me become a better Ruby developer by just reminding me like, oh, these things are only in Rails. And, oh, here's how I use Faraday. And, oh, here's how I can do all these other cool things. And it just gets you really good at writing Ruby. And the last thing I'll say about it is the community. I mean, the Ruby community itself is a wonderful, beautiful thing that I love dearly. And I spend a lot of time trying to promote, trying to build, trying to make content for, trying to show people that like, hey, Ruby's not dead. Rails isn't dead. We are alive, we are thriving, and we are growing. And it doesn't have to all be based on Rails, right? Bridgetown is a great example of how we can use Ruby outside of a Rails context and really build communities around that. If you're not in the Bridgetown Discord, I highly recommend you join it. It's an awesome community. And I just wanted to say that when I was first discovering Ruby, I discovered a group of people that were just as excited, or when I first discovered Bridgetown, I found a group of people who were just as excited about me as me about it. Connor Rogers, Jared, and then I just wanted to say this, that Mike Rogers, who was a good friend to me, who passed away about a year or two ago, was very big in the Bridgetown community in the very early days. He and I would pair and work on Bridgetown plugins, and we would work on Bridgetown sites together in the early hours of the morning. And I really appreciated all these relationships that I built through Bridgetown. And I see these people at conferences now, and it's just amazing. It's so much fun. So definitely join the community. And with that, go forth and build your first blog, build your first static site, build a podcast page like Drew Bragg has for his podcast. Build a marketing website for your company, build a shop, build anything, because I think you can build almost anything you want to with Bridgetown. And that's it. I want to say thank you, everyone, for listening. You can find me again at Andrew M. Codes around the web or on my website. Follow the podcast, subscribe to the newsletter, and check out Podia. And that's it.
Thank you, Andrew. Awesome talk. I feel like I've learned so much from just seeing all that laid out there. That was fantastic.
Cool.
All right, let me go ahead and once again post a link to the Discord if you're not in there already. And if you have any questions for Andrew on this talk, I think we have about 10 minutes. Yeah, then we'll just open this up to questions. I'll help you, Andrew, by finding a few questions to ask you. I noticed one in particular. Oh yeah, here we go. Ulrich asks, Andrew, do you share components between Rails and Bridgetown, or do you rebuild them? If the former, how? Do you have a custom design system exported in a custom gem? What's your thinking in terms of components and design systems?
I'm a big burn it all down and then rebuild it, which is why this morning at 4 a.m. I rebuilt this entire slideshow from scratch. No comment. So I used to be of the mind of like, oh, I'll make an engine and I'll share it with everything, which GitHub Primer is a great example of. Jared has an example online of how you can integrate GitHub Primer's view component design system directly into your Bridgetown site. I was in the very beginning, my sole goal was to like share as many components as possible. But over the time, like I found that building them in Bridgetown first made them actually better in the Rails app. So if anything, what I do now is I pull the components out of Bridgetown into my Rails app. And should I make an engine to be able to share those? 100%. But I have a lot of fun just tinkering on them, and it's not completely solidified because every time I remake them, I find a new, better way. So I'm not doing a ton of sharing right now. You 100% could. And if I was to build a new Rails app right now from scratch, I would take all of the components I built in Bridgetown and just copy them over. I don't have a custom design system. I use Tailwind. I have like a set of Tailwind like designs and styles that I use for a lot of things, but it's not like it's not something I use every single time, and it's always consistent.
Thanks, Andrew. Sort of a follow-up question in a way. Why is that so? Asks, I'd be interested to go a bit deeper into the topic of templates versus partials versus components versus view components. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. A component is for something that you want to reuse. A partial is for something that you do not want to reuse. A template is for something, or a layout, instead of template, let's use layout. A layout is for something that you want to be universal across all pages within that collection. So if I'm adding a footer, I'll probably use a partial, right? Because I'm only going to use it one time in my default layout, and then I'm never going to make it again. So it doesn't really make a ton of sense for me to do it unless there's a lot of logic associated with that partial, right? If I have to do any logic, then all of a sudden we're in a component. But if it's no logic and it's just like going to be one thing not reused, I'm going to use a partial. And if I'm going to reuse it, I'm going to use a component. If I'm going to use components, I always use view component because I think it makes me a better developer at work because we use view component. And so by practicing my view component skills in Bridgetown, like I've said already, I think that makes me a lot better. And that's made me, has given me a lot of skills that my team has now been able to benefit from. And then for your templates and things like that, it's like, I want to wrap all of these resources with the same styling. And so that's when you use layouts, and then you add templates and partials inside of them.
Cool. I think that breakdown is great to kind of help clarify some of those different use cases. One thing I'd like to ask as well that Ulrich mentioned is just kind of in general, like, what are your thoughts on import maps? And, where do you think things are heading in terms of import maps versus, say, using ESBuild?
My opinion is an opinion that is not universally shared and only belongs to me. And it is that import maps are not something I would ever use in a production site. I consider them not experimental, but like when I'm building a production web application, performance is very, very important for me. And getting the styles and the dependencies as small as possible so that when my users load the page, they're not getting megabytes and megabytes of data coming over. They're getting like 1 megabyte, right? So I use ESBuild for everything. And I'm just not really a big fan of import maps. And there's a remote Ruby episode that I can link in the BridgetownConf 2022 chat with Connor Rogers that kind of explains and goes a little bit more into why I feel like that, and also kind of give some evidence for why that's maybe a valid opinion.
All right. Well, apologies if I missed one here, but I think that wraps things up. Once again, thank you so much, Andrew, for your talk. And